A few more people are still coming in. A warm welcome to the dozens and dozens of INSEAD alumni from all over Europe and even beyond who are keen to learn more about the Green Deal. My name is Hans Reus. In my free time, I'm the chairman of the Dutch INSEAD Sustainability Club. And Loïc Schreurs, who sits on the board of the Dutch INSEAD Alumni Association, and we will be co-hosting this session. A couple of housekeeping messages. First of all, this session is being recorded. And in terms of the agenda for this afternoon, our keynote speaker will share his views on the Green Deal for about 15-20 minutes, and then I will have the pleasure of asking him a number of questions. You're welcome to submit your own questions right from the start via the chat box. Loïc will make a selection of these questions and ask these during the second part of the webinar, and then we will wrap up. Our keynote speaker today is Diederik Samsom. After his study applied physics, Mr. Samsom started his career as a Greenpeace campaigner. Afterwards, he switched careers towards politics, gradually evolving into a prominent name in the Dutch political landscape. Between 2003 and 2016, he was elected to the Dutch House of Representatives. And in 2012, he was elected as a party leader and as well as the parliamentary leader of the Dutch Labour Party. Since 2019, most importantly, he's the head of the cabinet of Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Frans Timmermans. Most importantly for today's session, Mr. Samsom is a key player in the establishment of the European Green Deal and a highly passionate and inspiring speaker. Mr. Samsom, a very warm welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Nice.
Could I ask you, let's dive straight into it, to share your views on the Green Deal, please?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. And that's a story. You can tell many stories about the Green Deal, but I would like to tell you the story of the Green Deal, the only environmental policy that survived not one, but two geopolitical crises. And as some of you who have been active in this field know, that's quite unique. In order to do that, I have to take you back to another era, which is the pre-corona era in which we presented the Green Deal. That was December 2019, 1 week into the mandate of the von der Leyen Commission. There's a whole story to be told about how this commission got the mandate to make such a plan, but that's for another seminar. The Green Deal is different from normal environmental policies that you normally receive from Brussels, normally in the amount of dozens per year. But this is completely different in three ways. First of all, its ambition. For once, politicians did not settle for the lowest common denominator, the normal landing strip in politics. For once, we were able to just write down what was needed to preserve our ecosystem for future generations. So hence the climate neutrality goal for 2050, with a milestone in 2030 of -55 in order to be also in check with the available carbon budget that we still have. But not only that, also the ambition to stop the loss of biodiversity completely. Because if you could compare apples to oranges, and you shouldn't, because you can't, but if you do, you could argue that the loss of biodiversity is actually a bigger threat to future generations and their wealth than climate change. Again, don't compare apples to oranges, both are existential. But not only that, also the ambition to stop pollution altogether. To stop the pollution of our air, our soil, and our water. We have polluted enough in the last 250 years. And not only that, but also to the ambition to become a full circular economy before the half of the century. So those four ambitions, bigger than ever, put together in one plan. And that's the second difference between normal environmental policy and the Green Deal. Because normal environmental policy, as you receive from Brussels in dozens per year, are always about one thing at the time. So it's about shipping, and then it's about agriculture, and then it's about water, and then it's about energy, and then it's about soil. And then you discover that many of those environmental policies are not aligned or even work against each other. This time is different. we got the mandate to make one plan for one ecosystem. And well, if you come to think of it, there's nothing more logical than that, because there is only one ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, everything is connected to everything else, as we now endured in the pandemic for 2 years. And so there's nothing more logical than making one plan in which everything is connected with everything else. Yet it wasn't done before. But the third difference is the biggest one and the most important one, and actually the main reason why the Green Deal is still alive, having survived 2 geopolitical crises. The third is, it's not an environmental plan. It's an economic plan. It's a growth strategy. And as Hans already explained, I have a background in the environmental movement, so I remember pretty vividly the raised eyebrows, or worse, that I got from my fellow NGO comrades from the past, because how on earth can you have the audacity to present an environmental plan with those ambitions as an economic growth strategy? That is a contradictio in terminis. I beg to differ. I don't think it is, because growth does not only have a size, it more importantly has a direction. And if we are able, and I have to put that big if there, if we are able to change that direction, we are able to grow and reach our sustainability goals at the same time. Anyway, I'm even if this theory is not as correct as I tried to explain it, I'm still happy that we did put the Green Deal forward as an economic growth strategy. Because fast forward from December 2019 into March 2020, when the world crashed into the corona crisis, we were all obviously faced with a world that was turned upside down. Our personal world, our professional life, the world as a whole, at least society in that world. And after having recovered from the first panic situation in terms of healthcare and PPA material, and I think the Netherlands is still dealing with parts of those remnants of that policy that was put down in the first 3 to 4 weeks, as we did also from Brussels. After a week of 4, we sat down and looked each other in the eye here in Brussels, saying, okay, what's next? So how do we survive? How do we recover from what will be a very deep economic dive down? We didn't know how deep, we didn't know how long. I think every letter of the alphabet is used for that, to describe that economic dip, a V shape, or a square root shape, or an I shape, or a J shape. We didn't know, but we knew one thing. We knew that we needed a growth strategy in order to recover from Corona. Well, that came to handy. We already had one. The ink was just dry of the Green Deal. So here something happened that never happened before. Because what happens before in geopolitical crisis, like the financial crisis that we saw around 2009 and 10, or other ones, the first thing that gets shelved is environmental policy. Normally, politicians lack the political capital, after having spent all of that to address the crisis, to also come forward with environmental ambitions. So as an example, just before the financial crisis in 2007, Al Gore mesmerized Europe with its movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And some of us do remember the days after, the months after that, with editorials written by Tony Blair and Jan-Peter Balkenende together in the Financial Times, with language like, this is our time, this is our moment, we have to step up to the plate, the urgency at hand. Well, you know the drill. That was all there. And it was about to be translated into policy. And then Lehman Brothers fell. And we have never heard about An Inconvenient Truth again. There is a sequel, by the way. So that's the normal business as usual. And this time, the Green Deal was not shelved in response to Corona. No, it was put on steroids with a 750 billion investment package called the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And by the way, at the moment, as we speak, the College of Commissioners, the 27, are discussing the Polish Recovery and Resilience Plan. As you know, that's also another seminar, but it's quite an interesting way of operating in Europe. Spending 750 billion euros with a very targeted set of objectives, all of them aligned with the Green Deal. So as of July 2020, when the Recovery and Resilience Facility was adopted after 5 days and 5 nights of European Council, especially due to the Dutch Prime Minister, who at that time still was in his frugal mode and didn't want to spend any money. But that set aside, we have it now, and we are embarking on this trajectory towards minus 55 and the other objectives of the Green Deal. And then fast forward to the 24th of February this year, when something happened that most of us thought would never happen again. A war on the European continent, a war the size we've not seen before. All of us in this meeting, I guess, our parents have seen that before, our grandparents, but we have never seen that before on the European continent. And all of a sudden, we woke up from that decades-long sleepwalking into an over-dependency of our fossil fuels, the bedrock of our societal wealth still, unfortunately, from an over-dependence from that very critical raw material from one supplier, an adverse supplier, by the way. And we all knew it. We knew it since 2014 when he annexed the Crimea. We actually knew it from before there when he went into Georgia, and actually also meddled into Moldova and Transnistria. We could all see the signals, but we didn't. And now all of a sudden we woke up and decide to become independent from Russian fossil fuels. And if you look at our dependency, it's 75% of oil, 40% of gas, 90% of uranium, by the way, and also quite a chunk of coal. We have an incredible over dependency on that one supplier. But there's a huge momentum now, and we've seen it in the last month or so, to get rid of that. And here's the other supercharging of the Green Deal, because while we were investing ourselves into a sustainable society, minus 55, it's all, well, that was already quite ambitious. We now put the whole thing into the supercharger, because on top of the climate goals is now an energy security goal, and that changes the equation quite dramatically, by the way. We've modeled it, assessed it with the best people we have in this commission, and I can tell you, I always bragged about the Dutch civil service being the best in the world. I think the Dutch civil servants could met his opponent, the Brussels civil service. So we have, with using all those people and computers, we've modeled what will happen in a high price environment where we do not want to use Russian fossil fuels anymore. And well, the result is intuitively pretty simple. But if you put it into figures, it's quite impressive. We're going to use more coal. Yes. We're also going to use more nuclear energy. Yes. And we especially going to use much more renewables, and we're going to save more energy. For the last two, just to put that into figures, on top of a very large ambition to have 40% of our energy supply fully renewable in 2030, we need to put down an extra amount of solar panels with an area of 2,000 square kilometers. 2,000 square kilometers extra on top of the ambition of Fit for 55. And in terms of energy saving, we need to save more energy than we anticipated in order to become independent from Russia. The amount of energy that we're going to save on top of all the energy that we were already planning to save is the amount of energy a country like Austria is using. So it's an incredible extra ambition, which is a political challenge, a financial challenge, technical challenge, but most of all a social challenge. And I want to end my introduction with that, because I can't overstate the importance of that challenge. Technically, we can do this. Financially, we are the richest continent in the world. This must be possible. Politically, I think we've mustered, also with some outside help, war, COVID, etc. So circumstantial enabling factors, we can muster the political weight to do this. But the biggest challenge is social, because we are going into a transition that mankind has never seen before. And we know what transitions mean. We had the first industrial revolution, the second, the third, and if you count, this is sort of the fourth. But those three first industrial revolutions taught us a very important lesson. Industrial revolutions, transitions, are always Darwinistic in its nature. They always end up with more money and more power in the hands of fewer people. You could say that's a law of nature, but in this case, it's a law of society. And what happened, especially in Europe, and we can all be proud of that, is we repaired that damage afterwards. And the first industrial revolution led to the rise of labor unions. The second led to the rise of the social movement, the social democratic parties. And altogether, we've sort of created an environment where, using the wealth of that industrial revolution, because every industrial revolution tripled our wealth, using that extra wealth, we created sort of a fair society. I mean, there's loads to be done still, etc. The world is not a fair place, but within the world, Europe is quite a fair continent. But this one is different in many ways, essential ways. This transition is faster than ever. It's more intrusive than ever. And it will not make us 3 times as rich. So the challenge to turn this into a social transition is way bigger. Also because we cannot use the choreography of the past, make the industrial revolution happen and repair the damage afterwards. Our populations are way too grown up to accept that, rightly so. So enshrining justice into this transition, that's our biggest challenge. With the means that we have, with the political curve, because it requires redistribution, big time, the mother of all political questions, to an extent that we have never, that even in Europe, we have not shown before. But if we don't show it now, this transition will not happen. So it needs to, the politicians of today need to be courageous enough to not only make this enormous transition happen, but also create justice along the way. And that's where we are now, about to embark on a journey that is going to be incredible. I think it's going to end well, but I'm biased. But certainly will require an enormous amount of all our effort. With that, I hand back to Hans for the rest of this seminar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samsom. Really much appreciated the ambition level, and also how comprehensive this whole program is obviously mind-boggling. What I would like to do is ask you a number of questions going from macro to micro, if you will. Let's start with the big picture. If you compare the Green Deal as we have it in Europe, and obviously what you're doing to implement it, if you compare that to what's happening in other parts of the world, let's say in Asia or in the US, just 2 examples, how does that compare? How do those initiatives that people in those countries are taking, the Road and Belt initiatives, the various initiatives in the US, how do we stack up?
I would say we stack up quite well, but it's like comparing different galaxies, although they are on the same planet Earth in this case, because those 2 other parts of the world that you mentioned, and indeed it's about those relevant 3 blocks that we're talking about. Obviously, the rest of the world is not unimportant, and I can say more about that. But at the moment, the geopolitical balance, and also in terms of climate policy, is shaped in China, US, and Europe. So I've explained the way Europe deals with it in a typical European way. Governance as the main driver, public governance as our main tool, and with all the policies that are connected with it. In the US, it's a completely different story. It's entrepreneurial driven. But I can't say that they do a very bad job there. Actually, on the contrary, those entrepreneurs that we don't have in Europe, because we don't have the same entrepreneurial environment, we don't have the financial environment. We finance our companies completely. Most of you know much more about that than I do, but we finance our companies in a completely different way than the US does. And to give you one example, it might be a cliche example, but that's because it's a relevant example. Elon Musk and Tesla, the way they operated in from the US is revolutionary. They changed the car industry with a financial model that we will. I doubt whether we will ever be willing to adapt such a policy. I mean, he went bankrupt 15 times and still invested more. So his answer to making loss was making more loss in order to make a profit at the end. Seems pretty illogic, but it worked. And he turned the car industry upside down, and we profit from it in many ways. China has a different way of operating. I sometimes compare China with a company the size of a continent. And so it is a top-down approach. They look at that country as a company with a company strategy. And again, I can't say that they do a particularly bad job in many of the technologies that we're talking about right now: electrolyzers, electrical cars, batteries, solar panels. It's China leading the way. So both continents have a very problematic approach to the just transition. Actually, they don't have an approach to the just transition whatsoever. They don't have an approach. China doesn't have an answer to the democratic transition. So all of us will face our own, let's say, trouble and problems. But I'm quite confident that as a planet, we might be able to accomplish this.
Excellent. There's a number of initiatives in Europe. Let's focus on Europe a bit more. You know, there's the corporate sustainability reporting directive. There's the corporate sustainability due diligence. There's the farm to fork. How do these initiatives in Europe hang together?
Well, within the Green Deal, as I said, part of that plan. Actually, I sometimes use this. I'm not sure whether you can see it. It's a puzzle I always carry with me since I'm 10, actually. It's that wooden ball made out of very strange puzzles, and it's quite a difficult one. But if you're able to make it, it's hard to deconstruct it. It's really one ball, and everything is connected with everything else. And the other way around, if you remove something, hardly anything is left. And that's where all those pieces of the puzzle are as relevant as every other piece. Our political attention goes much more to climate and energy policy, because that's big business, literally. It's about a large chunk of money. It's the hard side of the economy. But the farm to fork is about preserving our biodiversity, and is, as I explained earlier, just as important as the climate policy. And we have to change the way we grow our food. And the way we consume it and throw it away, ending that latter part of the chain, obviously. So it is an incredible important part of our work. And the two initiatives that you mentioned as examples that are targeted at in this case, companies, we have obviously similar parts of our policy that is targeted at governments or at citizens, because everybody has to play its part here. And we have addressed all the shortcomings, and we came to the conclusion that, let's say, the social responsibility that is carried by companies, well, there's room for improvement there. And that's why we came up with those directives that in itself are not perfect, by the way, because that's the sobering lesson of the Green Deal. It's a great plan in December 2019, and now piece for piece you present the real legislative proposals, and you can see the holes in there, the shortcomings. To give you one example, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to be popular in this meeting now, but I wanted to make the governance, so the board of directors, individually responsible for the damage done by the company, legally liable. That didn't make it. No chance. Europe is had our corporate structure is not designed to do so. I would have a better shot at it in the US, to be honest, a much more litigating society. But in this world in which we talk to each other and we don't pull each other in front of the court for every action, that had no chance. And I still regret that, because I do think it will make a difference. But we will see.
Here's another question that I'd like to ask. Clearly, getting the buy-in from the countries, but also from the people in the various European countries, will be crucial for the success of the Green Deal. What is both the formal decision-making process going down from here, as well as your approach to winning the minds and hearts of the people in Europe to get this over the finish line?
Yeah, here's our challenge. I mean, the Brussels machinery it's a strange, a magical beast. So the Commission makes a proposal. We are obviously the infamous faceless bureaucrats that are not elected. So we don't have to care about that. But we present this to the co-legislators, who both have a democratic mandate, a different one. So you could compare it in national politics to the lower and the upper house of a parliament. But we present it to the European Parliament and the European Council. And they both have to agree. And then we come in a more of a US type of lawmaking, where Parliament takes a position, Council takes a position on the Commission's position, and then we organize a trilogue, reconciliation, it's called, on the other side of the Atlantic. But we organize a trilogue in order to get to a common position. And when that's done, we have our laws. We haven't won the hearts and minds of people yet. And that's obviously, that needs to happen via the quality of what we are doing, the quality of our policy, but also the quality of our politicians. And I would argue the audacity of our politicians. And that's where you are in the hands of politicians. Actually, if you look, you are actually in the hands of society, because they elect our politicians. And that's where things can go really haywire. But so far so good in terms of what I see on the stage is more and more political leaders that have the mandate to go further than their predecessors. I mean, we all focused on the re-election of Orban, and that's not a very bright example, I admit. But just after Hungary, behind Hungary, is that nice little country Slovenia, where for 4 years Janša was the prime minister, and well, his nickname was Baby Trump in many ways. He's ousted by the Slovenian public and replaced by a green leader. So let's see what happens in the rest of Europe with winning hearts and minds, because that's the crucial development.
And what other barriers do you see that need to be overcome? I don't want to be negative. We'll talk about successes in a moment, but just trying to understand what barriers need to be overcome, and potentially even how the INSEAD community could help. Many of us are employed in sectors or companies or own companies that are potentially capable of carrying their own load.
Well, it's too many to count in terms of, but the bigger ones are obviously. We can all watch the inflationary environment that we are now walking into, financially challenging. And guess what? The Green Deal is only adding fuel to the fire in terms of inflation, with its investment needs and its personal requirement, its requirement to have many more people working on this, putting obviously a pressure on wages. So yeah, we only fuel the inflationary environment. So I was more happy and more relaxed about that with 0% inflation than with the 9 that we currently have, or 8.1 it was yesterday in the Eurozone. So that's one big challenge. The other one I already mentioned, our labor force is not fit for purpose. We don't have the people to install all those solar panels and windmills, etc. Retrofit 200 million houses. We need to skill our workforce. We need to import and to attract new people for many reasons, but this is one of them. That's a huge challenge. Raw materials. If you do not have oil as a raw material, you still rely on parts of the world that are not very friendly to us. For instance, an exotic material like neodymium, which is essential for the magnets that we use in our offshore windmills, and in many more things, by the way. Lithium, we all need to find a bit more of that in order to make the batteries that we need, or, because this is the trade-off here, innovation. And you can innovate yourself out of your scarcity of raw materials by inventing alternatives. And that needs to happen too. But as I said, the biggest one is the social challenge. And that's also where the environment is not getting friendlier. Inflation, the living wage the living standards crisis that is the result of the incredible increases in prices of energy and food. So we're gonna have a few challenges ahead of us.
So what would be your call to action for, let's say the business community? The motto of our sustainability club is from words to action. So we'd like to entice, our fellow alumni into action. What is it that the business community could do?
Well, there's many things, and for every business, it's obviously, in practical terms, is very different. But there's one overarching principle or mentality, actually, that I would try and promote with all of you and all the others out there in the business community is we environmental policy or sustainability was for a long time, it was synonymous to delay and disappointment and setbacks. We all have those. I mean, having been in this battle for my whole adult life, I grew up with sustainability as well, as indeed a chain of disappointments. Those solar panels were more expensive than you would like. They were less powerful than you would have hoped for, and etc. That was the reality for a long time, and that has only recently changed. But it has changed radically. So by now things are going much faster than many of us anticipate. I mean, there's many examples of that, but one of them is the chairman of Volkswagen, the biggest car manufacturer in the world. You could argue that that guy knows something about cars. So in 2016, which is only a few years ago, he went in front of his troops, which is 200,000 in total, and he said, the electrical car ist eine Sackgasse, German word for dead end alley. The electrical car will go nowhere. Our strategy is to clean the diesel. Well, we all know what happened with that. So, and now we see Volkswagen investing 35 billion euros per year, which is an incredible amount of money. You could argue that's not a business plan, that's panic, but still. And they do this in order to develop their electrical drivetrain. They've missed the boat almost. And there's history is riddled, or recent history is riddled with those examples. COVID has learned us a very personal lesson for all of us, because we all miss those curves. Governments do, people do, because we are not used to exponential growth. We cannot deal with exponential growth. So when those COVID infections increased, we think, wow, that's not a big number. No, but times two, times two, times two, and you are in an incredible peak. Solar panels are growing exponentially at the moment. And this is what companies need to grasp, because I speak too many important people, influential people in the business sector that still think that it will take its time. No rush. If I would talk, I talked to the steel industry for years. And if you would talk to Tata Steel or whoever else 3 years ago about hydrogen and hydrogen steel, they would roll their eyes and even hand you the basic book of chemistry to explain to you that that is nonsense, that will not happen. Only 3 years later, Tata is completely changing its strategy and it's going full guns blazing into hydrogen steel. And the sooner we get used to this new reality, the better it is.
I've one more question for you before I turn it over to Loic, because a couple of dozen questions have come in through the chat box. You're clearly very passionate about this topic, as many people on this call are. What drives you personally? Why are you so passionate about this topic? Why have you devoted most of your career on this topic?
Yeah, there's many. There's actually, if you look back at your life, you have those. Some of you, at least I have. You look back and you think, okay, that was a life-changing moment. And for me, it was actually one day. It was my birthday, my 14th birthday, and it was a very simple combination of a book and a bomb. The bomb was the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland, New Zealand, on the 10th of July, 1985. And the book was Thea Beckman's Kinderen van Moeder Aarde, which is the writer of my youth, and some of yours too, I guess. Children of Mother Earth, the fantasy story about the people of Greenland, Thule, in a world after the Third World War, the 80s. We still had those perspectives at that time. And it's a story about a population that survived that enormous violence, so violent that the world has turned, and Greenland is on the Mediterranean, in a Mediterranean climate, so beautiful country, and they decide to learn the lesson of the past and do things better. Fully sustainable, and by the way, also women in charge, because men make a mess out of it. And so there's many reasons, but those two things together, I think, were pretty fundamental. And 1 year later, Chernobyl exploded, learning as the lesson that technology needs to be kept in check. You can do nice but also awful things with technology, and that's where I decided to study physics and join the environmental movement.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Loic, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the full audience for asking all those interesting questions. Diederik is asking the following: the track record of governments in achieving climate goals is very low. Could you give us some confidence that the 55% will be achieved? And if not, is there a plan B?
No, there's no plan B, but I'm less pessimistic. And I have some evidence to show for, because we had a plan to go for -40. You might say that's lame, lame ambition, but at the time that we set the ambition, it was quite ambitious for Europe. And if we would not have changed our policies towards -55, we would have ended up in -45. So we would have overshot the climate target. That has all to do, not much to do with the fact that we now have better politicians, but technology is catching up. As I said, it's now going so much faster than only a few years ago, that we have reason to be optimistic. There is this, I learned a lesson from a very wise man, Klaas van Egmond. He's the old director of the RIVM and a professor. And he said, Diederik, mankind has that strange tendency of running into a wall, and then just before hitting it, finding something to jump over it, as mankind. Obviously, one of the examples is Malthus, who already predicted that if we would go on like that, we would starve to death, because there was not much nitrogen, not enough nitrogen to feed the world. And then we invented fertilizer and new crops, and here we are. 12 billion people can eat from planet Earth if we are sustainable and careful enough. And a more funny example is, at some point, somebody calculated that if the amount of horse coaches in London would grow at the speed that it did in 1840, London would drown in 2 meters of horse shit within 2 decades or something. And then we invented the bicycle, the car, the metro, and that all didn't happen. But he also added one other sentence. He said, we have to be worried because the speed at which we approach the wall is getting bigger every time, and the wall is getting higher. So we make it very thrilling. There's no guarantee that this time again we will jump the wall.
Interesting. Well, you clearly already stated that we're inventing a lot. And Grindel is asking the following: how can Europe stimulate the entrepreneurship climate to create global champions that help solving the challenge in a complex ecosystem?
Yeah, that's one of the things we struggle with. Global champions. I mean, Europe hardly has global champions left. The new global champions are Chinese or US for reasons that I already explained. I'm not sure whether we want or need to copy that. I still think we have something to be very proud of. You could call it the European way to organize ourselves and also to organize our entrepreneurship. I do think, however, that we, as Europe, we are a little too risk averse in many ways. Also, our policies are a little too risk averse to meet the challenges of today, but also our companies are. The amount of times that I am approached as a policymaker to create a level playing field, because otherwise the company cannot take the risk of doing something new, is mind-boggling. I have Shell on my desk here, wanting to know exactly, in the last little detail, what is going to be in a delegated act, which is sub-legislation to a very low level. And they want to know Article 3D.2, in which we describe the definition of green hydrogen, because they are not going to embark on green hydrogen if they are not certain that their hydrogen meets that definition. Okay, fine, fair. At the same time, they're going out in the world drilling for oil in parts of the world where you don't even have a government tomorrow. I mean, Libya, South Sudan. Apparently, Shell doesn't care about the risks of doing those things. They know how those risks, apparently, they manage them, and they are completely risk averse on going into hydrogen because it's completely new, etc. And I don't blame them, actually, because many companies have this same behavior. But I do think that should change, and also in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Miguel is asking the following: what efforts should be made in the area of taxation? So, for example, he's stating, wouldn't straight tax per product CO2 ton be, or produced CO2 ton be more efficient?
No, our emission trading system, but I'm biased as hell here, but our emission trading system is the most efficient way to internalize the external costs of climate change. It's a self-propelled instrument. It guarantees you meeting the target. It delivers the public revenues that you need in order to make the change happen. So if I would concentrate on taxation and the changes in taxation, I would concentrate on the biggest challenge that we have, which is the social challenge. So we need to tax wealth and profits much more than income in order to create a social challenge. In the end, as I said earlier, in the end, this transition is all about the mother of politics, which is redistribution. And the mandate that you need from your public, from your voters, to take money from part of them in order to give it to the others. And that's always a struggle. And don't think that you can get away with the slogan, tax the rich. There's not enough rich people to pay for this. So it's all of us that are going to be taxed in one way or another. That would be the biggest challenge. I think on technology, as I said, we know how to tax that and how to create the revenues.
All right, and given the fact that we're all responsible for it, Grindel is asking a question building upon this one, because he's stating there are still lots of energy uses that are not necessary but more for comfort. And his question is the European Union going to be consistent and ready to regulate those who use it for comfort rather than necessary purposes?
I can't exclude that we get to that point at some point in time. We think, and we also, the Green Deal is built on the presumption that that is still untouchable territory. So rationing the behavior of people. But we've now seen in the energy crisis that we come close to such an instrument. Actually, what we're doing in Europe is mind-boggling and exactly very ineffective, or actually contra-effective, by lowering energy prices in order to keep people happy, or at least keep people, enable people to pay the bill, which is a very good purpose, by the way. But lowering energy prices to do that is crazy. But the alternative, rationing energy, is taboo. And so far, we are such a rich continent that we can afford ineffective policies to a large extent. So I'm not sure. I'm quite confident that we will manage this. But if this energy crisis gets bigger than it is right now, then we might enter into this territory of rationing our consumption. I just get a signal that I have to cut this short. I'm very sorry about that, but let's do one more question. And then
well, fair. This is a question that I just want to ask myself. Given that you're already fighting the bureaucratic obstacles and to enable systematic change, but what are you doing on a personal level, on a daily basis, to enable this change?
My life is filled with failures, like every human being's life, and it strengthens me all the time on my own shortcomings, and I'm sure there's better people than I am, so I shouldn't take myself as the benchmark, but let's assume I'm an average person, an average consumer, an average father. Then my shortcomings in changing my behavior do strengthen my conviction that this needs to be organized. We can't change our behavior out of this problem. We need to organize ourselves into a new society. So I support all the calls for take the train, skip the plane, put your thermostat 2 degrees lower, and I all do that. And I went to this office this morning by car because there's a strike in the metro, and there we are. That was my personal failure of today. It's an electrical car, but still it's 2,000 kilograms, transporting 75 kilograms of human body, which is a very ineffective way of replacing yourself. And we all do that from day to day. So I encourage everybody to keep giving it its utmost, but and that's it. I have to leave you. I'm sorry about that, but
on that note, can I just ask, can I just thank you on behalf of all the INSEAD alumni, a heartfelt thank you for not just the valuable information you've shared with us, but also, for the dedication, the commitment, the energy you put into the Green Deal. Thank you ever so much. We've planted a number of trees in your name through the Life Terra organization, which will sequester a fair amount of carbon dioxide over the years to come. So thank you very much for being with us, and good luck with all your hard work. Thank you so much.